Welcome back. The program is Good Morning Nigeria. You're right in time for the first part of our discussion, and that is if you just joined us anyway. And if you've been following, I'm sure you're waiting to actually say to this particular segment of the program. Now, to take a look at the National Assembly, the 8th National Assembly, of course, we have a guest already seated. There were several bills, there were motions, there was the first-day relationship, but then how did it all play out? Our guests will be telling us in a moment, or at least we'll take a look at that. Then the 8th National Assembly joining us to look at that this morning. We'd like to welcome Senator Ita Enang. He's the Senior Special Assistant to the President on National Assembly Matters. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Nigerians.
All right, Senator Ita Enang, pleasure to have you again. And as we did indicate at the commencement of this conversation, we're looking at it from the executive perspective. The story out there is that the relationship between the legislature, that's to say the 8th National Assembly, and the executive branch was frosty. But in spite of that, there would appear to have been a very busy conveyor belt of bills that were passed by the National Assembly. Some or most assented to, and also there seemed to have been a high rate of rejection, or decline rather, by the President. Evaluating the transactions between the executive and the legislative branches for the 8th National Assembly over the last 4 years, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think the relationship was tough, hard, often frosty, not the best of what ought to have been, but the leadership of President Muhammadu Buhari converted it to the best of situations, because the nature of the relationship did not allow for any other matter other than constitutional observance of your roles, of the role of the legislature and the executive. And what Mr. President did was to make sure that even in the nature of the relationship that was, which is improving, because the relationship has improved a little bit after the elections, because much of the things that led to the frosty relationship were political issues, some interest, and some, I'm sure you observed some of them during the primaries of the political parties and even during the elections. And after that, the president, Mr. President, has won the election, APC has won the elections. So after that, most of those issues have gone well. Now, most of, on the part of Mr. President, on the part of the executive, we had real concentration on scrutiny of bills passed by the legislature. And some of them, which ordinarily Nigerians would have thought that it should be assented to, because they were just a matter of course, it was some such that if Mr. President assents to it, there would be more problem, there would be political or legal confusion, and there would be institutional destabilization. For instance, if you take some bills, if I can get into particular, some bills like the National Transport Commission, and then you take some bills like the avoidance of double taxation between the Federal Republic of Nigeria and the Republic of Korea. Now, take the bills on Korea. It was a treaty or an agreement agreed between Nigeria and Republic of Korea in 2006. And the agreement was signed by Nenadi Usman, as he then was later Senator of the Federal Republic, as Minister of State Finance. Now, it was presented to the legislature at that time. It wasn't assented, it wasn't passed. It was later presented in 2011, it ran into trouble. Now, in 2016, Mr. President, or thereabout, Mr. President presented it again. Now, when the legislature passed it, the Senate and the House, they changed the words that were in the treaty. They excluded some of the clauses, like clause 24 of the agreement, in such that if Mr. President assents to it, it will be a different agreement, not what was signed between the two countries, that is South Africa, that is Republic of Korea and Nigeria. For instance, they changed the word from prohibition, from avoidance of double taxation to prohibition of double taxation. Then the National Assembly also changed the word Republic of Korea to Republic of South Korea. And if you say Republic of South Korea and Mr. President assents to it, then it is an agreement between a non-existing country. It is a different thing altogether. As minor as it was, as it seemed in the eyes of the ordinary man, but Mr. President's legislative refinery, Mr. President's team, and Mr. President all detected this and said, look, this cannot be. And if I sign it, it will create a problem. And so Mr. President declined assent, stated his reasons. Fortunately, a very responsive legislature has seen it. Both the Senate and the House of Representatives have passed it again and will be communicating it to Mr. President for consideration. Now, you look at the bill on the National Transport Commission. You look at the way it seems to appropriate the functions of other ministries to be under the Shippers Council. And in the bill, in the words of in the communication of Mr. President to the National Assembly, that if he assents to the National Transport Commission as it is, passed by the National Assembly, it will make the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing to now be under the National Transport Commission. And the National Transport Commission will now transmute, and the Shippers Council will now transmute to be the National Transport Commission, making the ministries that are supposed to supervise it to now be under it. And when you look at this, now you will now know that Mr. President had reasonable, cogent, and verifiable reasons to decline assent to some of the bills. Like some of the ones definitely sought to take the monies of state government, federal government, state government, local government, and federal government to be appropriated to some of the agencies that were created, And Mr. President said, I am the President of the Federal Republic. I cannot allow the monies that are meant or should be shared to the states and the local governments to be appropriated and given to any agency of the federal government. And sometimes he says, although you can, but it is excessive. And those arms of government and those tiers of government should survive and have their own money. And sometimes you have a bill passed which seeks to generate tax and make it belong to the federal government. Mr. President says, this tax you want to generate under this bill you've passed, it ought to be shared to the 3 tiers of government, and you are encroaching. This bill will encroach on the taxable avenues and revenues of the other tiers of government and will make them not viable and not have enough money. So if you see all this, Mr. President had to exercise a lot of refining, a lot of attention to all details before assenting or declining assent to bills. But most of these bills are being reworked again, and those that the National Assembly considers Mr. President's overriding, that is completely agreeable and nothing to pass, they have
Senator
rested.
Ita, good enough you've been able to evaluate, at least in your own way, what has taken place because of the 8th National Assembly. Let's take it. Being at least a lawmaker yourself, at least while you were in the House, there were tactics, there were styles for which every one of you moved for some of these motions and ultimately getting the bills across. For you, how would you score your colleagues, at least for the 8th National Assembly, some of those bills that were passed eventually, those that were assented to? Let's take, for instance, those had to do with ease of doing business and all those, the company and allied matters and the likes. Give us a sense of what really took place, ultimately getting us into what we are celebrating today, saying, okay, this commendation here and there.
Well, I will get to the specific of the companies and allied matters. The National Assembly has been very active, very responsive, very productive, and very engaging. Engaging the executive in most areas which the Assembly thought that it related to their powers. And of course, sometimes crossing what the executive considered the red line. And whenever they cross the red line, that related to matters which the executive considered that it was a matter for the executive, attention were drawn, and there was a pushback. Now, the legislature has been very active again, particularly after the elections. Every person has settled down, and all the bills have been considered and reconsidered. Like the Companies and Allied Matters bill, as it still is. I think there was a lot of effort by the Office of the Vice President, by the Ease of Doing Business Committee, headed by the Vice President, by our Vice President's office and His Excellency the Vice President, the Minister of Trade and Investment, the Corporate Affairs Commission, and the other civil society advocates on the ease of doing business. Now, they were engaged, and the bill that has been produced, had some issues. Now, Mr. President did not formally communicate declining assent, because we considered that given the volume of the bill and the issues involved, that we could apply our back channel, to address it. So we applied the back channel. We had a team, myself and other officers from the executive, and the team of the National Assembly led by His Excellency the Speaker of the House of Representatives, Right Honorable Yakubu Dogara. We took another look at the Companies and Allied Matters. We looked at the issues that there were reservations, and they were of a nature that would create confusion, but not strictly illegality. Confusion of illegality, of interpretation, confusion of application. Some areas were left out. We drew attention using our back channel. We've run into some agreement, some near agreement on that, and the National Assembly has repassed it. The same applied to the audit bill. The same applied to a lot of other bills. So we've gone far with this, and they have passed it again, and it will be transmitted soon again to Mr. President for consideration. So we did not, when the issues are of a nature that could be discussed, we get a back channel on.
Well, every piece of legislation is important.
Certainly.
But from the executive perspective, which of the bills that then became law would the executive find most heartwarming?
That's very difficult to say, because every bill that comes to Mr. President for a decision on a yes or no will be very heartwarming. But I think the few I could say that Mr. President really, all of us at the executive got really heartwarmed were the ones that related to labor. That is the minimum wage, the bill that the public choose to call the Not Too Young to Run, the bill that related to the amendment of the Constitution, because after a long time, this is one occasion where we have successfully amended several areas of the Constitution, particularly relating to elections, electoral processes, but opening the field for a greater participation of the electorate, of the younger persons, and then tidying the electoral process. The other bills are those that relate to the economy, and those ones that relate to the manufacturing and agricultural sector. The other one that will, when it eventually come into force, will be a few of them, including the avoidance of double taxation between the Republic of Korea and Nigeria, because that will open the vista for great number of investments and investors from Korea into Nigeria, like the big companies.
Quickly, distinguished Senator, so while Kingsley asks for those that are heartwarming, I'm sure there are still some that are kind of still a thorn.
I'm sorry?
I said there are still some bills, too, that are actually still bringing some kind of friction between the legislature and the executive.
It's not friction at all. It is engagement. Because I agree, Mr. President, the legislature swore in their oath to observe the provisions of the Constitution and the law. Mr. President swore to protect and defend the Constitution. So any matter which Mr. President, the executive and Mr. President considers that it will be a breach of the Constitution which he swore to protect and defend, he will definitely give a signal saying no. Anyone which had some small issues or issues which are not very nature, he will say, look, we can rework on it. So
like
there is the petroleum industry bill, it has been reworked again, and it has been passed again, but it's yet to be transmitted to Mr. President. But let me say that the petroleum industry bill, I won't predict, but it split the petroleum industry into three. And it is one of them that was passed. The other second one has also been passed, but is yet to be concurred, and we're yet to receive it. Now, remember, Mr. President had reservations because what the president said, and the public applauded, was if you give 10% of the entire amount that the Petroleum Regulatory Commission regenerates, that it will get into trillions. And like I've said once or twice, that Petroleum Regulatory Commission will become like a continent, bigger than what they will generate and keep. Will even be more than the budget of the country for a year. Then Mr. President also drew attention to another provision which related to Petroleum Equalization Fund, which was to keep 5% of the total value of the consumption of Nigerians on petroleum. Mr. President said that was too much. Already what it was keeping was too much, and that this money belongs to the local governments, state governments, federal capital territory, and the federal government, and that agency cannot generate and keep. So that's it.
There are some commentators who say that the 2019 elections might have been different in terms of the coloration if the Electoral Act Amendment Bill had been signed by the president.
That it would have had some different coloration?
Yeah, it might have had some different coloration.
I think it would have had a coloration of a negative nature. It would have had a coloration of some situation which would have led to more inconclusive elections. Remember, Nigeria is the state party to the ECOWAS Protocol and other international conventions. And Mr. President, in declining assent to the bill, to the Electoral Amendment Bill, as it were, had stated that, look, some of these provisions, if I assent to it now, the Independent National Electoral Commission will not be able to bring up strategies that will get that election on. It may lead to a postponement. I will assent to it if you state in the bill that the provisions will come into effect after 2019 elections. But if that is not so, and I assent to it, it will cause confusion. It will cause problems. We will be breaching international convention. We will be creating problem for the Independent National Electoral Commission. So, in your words, it would have given a different coloration to the 2019 election in the negative. And of course, the National Assembly agreed with it, and they have reconsidered most of those things and have passed another electoral amendment bill, which has been transmitted to Mr. President.
All right. Now, that's a very important point that I would like you to also respond to this before we sign you off. What happens in the overlapping transition period? The president's tenure ends at midnight tomorrow, and he gets sworn in for a second term on the 29th of May, which is on Wednesday. But the 8th National Assembly will not be functus officio until the 8th of June. So what happens to the bills that are before the president, and what happens to bills that the National Assembly may pass and then transmit to the president before the expiration of their tenure on the 8th of June?
President Muhammadu Buhari is still the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And the present 8th Assembly will be the legislature for President Muhammadu Buhari up to the day Mr. President will issue a proclamation dissolving it and another proclamation convening it. Now, the Constitution provides that the legislature shall exist for a period of 4 years, commencing from the date it was inaugurated. Therefore, so that there are still a living, functional, active, and legal legislature up to the dissolution by proclamation or end. Now, the bills they pass will still be assented to by Mr. President, and there will be, I think they may, if Mr. President forwards certain of the requests to him, because there are certain urgent requests which Mr. President will definitely, under the Constitution, have to make requests to them. So when Mr. President is sworn in for a second term, any matter he desires to be passed by the legislature will still be communicated to this 8th Assembly until the 9th Assembly is inaugurated on a date that will be proclaimed by Mr. President in the proclamation. The Constitution asked him to...
Senior Special Assistant to the President of the National Assembly Matters, Senator Ita Enang, thank you very much for coming to the program this morning. I appreciate your insights.
Thank you very much.
We'll take a break. When we return, it will be time to take a look at the Niger Delta and that region's activities under the Buhari administration. That will be after this break.
Go.